Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Our program we are presenting is Senior Safety. I'm Marianne. I'm an events planner with the Orange County Library System. Today, you're going to learn about different types of elder abuse and how to identify the warning signs of each type. Today, I'm very happy to be here with Emily Mitchell, the Education Coordinator from Victim Service Center of Central Florida. Victim Service Central Victim Service Center of Central Florida serves to transform victims' lives and prevent violence in our community. Just before we begin, I wanted to let everyone know that some of today's content will be sensitive in nature, so please keep that in mind as you watch. And during today's event, we will be sharing the VSC contact information in the comments and on the screen. Emily, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Marianne, and good afternoon, everyone. Like Marianne mentioned, my name is Emily Mitchell. I am the Education Coordinator at the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. Today, I'm going to be talking about elder abuse, and like Marianne mentioned, we're going to be talking about some things that are sensitive in nature, and kind of comes up, maybe some past experiences, maybe some negative emotions that can happen. That's completely normal. I just want to make sure that you all kind of take a step away if you need to. Please be mindful of yourself as we go through this training. But today, I'm going to just first talk a little bit about the Victim Service Center, of kind of the services that we provide in case you haven't heard of us before. And then we're going to delve right into it. So first off, we are a nonprofit organization that provides free confidential counseling services for survivors of any kind of trauma. So that trauma could have happened today. It could have happened years and years ago. It actually doesn't matter when it occurred. We're able to provide those free services for all of you. And we do that in a variety of different ways. But that trauma couldn't be a sexual assault. It could be a violent crime, maybe a break-in. Maybe you're a survivor of a shooting. Anything that is tied to an event that happened in the person's life that is affecting them today. And we do those services in a variety of different ways. We do have a 24-hour helpline that Marianne's going to be shooting across a couple of times. That is right now, actually. That is 24/7. Anyone can call that at any time with any questions. If you're going through an emotional moment, going through a crisis, you can call, and one of our amazing crisis counselors will be there on the other line. They are master's level trauma informed, and they're there to help kind of ground you and walk you through any kind of process that you need. In addition to that 24-hour helpline, we do provide crisis counseling. So those victim advocates that are on that other line are able to do immediate crisis counseling, kind of help you through, perhaps maybe if someone went through a sexual assault, for example, and they want to go through the justice system, a victim advocate can help maneuver them through that. In addition to that, we do have free therapy as well in our therapy department after someone goes through trauma and crisis, and they're ready to kind of process it and go deeper dive, that kind of thing. We do have a therapy department, and they're all licensed, trained professionals that specifically service trauma as well. That's completely free. And in addition to that, we have support groups. So those who are survivors that are maybe part of the LGBTQ plus community, we have a group for that. We have a men's group, women's group, a mixed gender group. We have a Spanish speaking group, and we have a Black survivors group as well. What's important to know is during COVID, we do have teletherapy. So we're able to do our support groups as well as our therapy appointments all online, but also we do have some in-person in our offices too. In addition to that, we are the Rape Crisis Center for Orange, Seminole, and Osceola County. We're the only rape crisis center for those counties. And so we have offices in downtown Orlando, in Longwood, as well as Kissimmee. And as part of the Rape Crisis Center for those counties, one of the other services that we provide is if a survivor goes through a sexual assault within 120 hours or 5 days of that assault occurring, they can call our 24/7 helpline. And from there, we can actually go to one of our confidential forensic exam locations. So if they would like to report later or not, we can actually meet them there, collect that DNA evidence, and store that evidence for them. And again, they don't have to decide at that moment. But again, a free service. And it's conducted by one of our amazing SANE nurses, or sexual assault nurse examiners, that are certified just for this specific thing. So those are just some of the amazing free confidential services that we're able to provide for the community that I like to bring up at the beginning, so that people are aware of what resources are out there. In addition to that, we also have prevention education, which is my role at the Victim Service Center. I'm really here to go out in the community and provide education on different topics, such as anti-bullying, such as sexual assault, sexual harassment, and then of course today we're going to be talking about elder abuse. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about senior safety. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be going over the types of elder abuse, like Marianne mentioned, and kind of defining what elder abuse even is, right? Then we're going to delve a little deeper into the signs of elder abuse. And the reason we do that is because one of the reasons why things like violence occur is because we actually don't see the signs that it is occurring, right? So it's important that we do see those signs. And then moving on, we'll be talking a little bit about how to do risk reduction. How can we reduce this abuse and make sure that this doesn't keep happening? We're going to delve a little deeper into elder theft and how to specifically reduce that risk too. And then we're going to finally talk about some barriers to reporting, and then our services as well as other services in the community for those who have experienced elder abuse and older adult abuse, right? So without further ado, let's first dive into exactly what is elder abuse. How do you define it, right? So it's an intentional act. That's really important, or failure to act. I think that that's really important too, to bring up by a caregiver or another person in a relationship involving an expectation of trust that causes or creates a risk of harm to an older adult. So this is pretty similar to like domestic violence, for example. There is a relationship, there is a relationship between an older adult and this other person with trust involved and expectation. And that is kind of broken either through an intentional act or failure to act. And first, I'm going to go over kind of some statistics regarding elder abuse, but also then we're going to break down each one. Just similar with domestic violence, for example, we kind of have this idea in our head that violence and abuse kind of just look physical, right? There's just a physical aspect of it. But as you know, the more we talk about things like violence, we can see now that there's actually abuse in different ways, right? It's not just physical abuse, which does happen, but it's important that we understand so that we can help prevent it. That being said, let's dive into some of those stats here. So these are statistics from the National Council on Aging. So I'm just going to read off some so that we understand more of, you know, elder abuse, right? So approximately 1 in 10 Americans age 60 and up have experienced some form of elder abuse. That's such a staggering number, right? I think it's happening a lot more than we realize. And then moving on from that, in almost 60% of elder abuse and neglect incidents, the perpetrator is a family member. So we're going to talk about, you know, these signs and how to reduce risk and stuff. But it's really important that we understand that most of the time it's with a family member, which is also a shocking statistic. And then recent studies show that nearly half of those with dementia experience abuse or neglect. So this is what we mean by an at-risk population, right? So those with dementia are more at risk for abuse or neglect, right? They're more vulnerable. When I started this training, I talked about, you know, these are the different trainings I do. And you might have been asking yourself, what do these have to do with each other? What does bullying have to do with sexual harassment and, you know, sexual assault and healthy relationships? They all have to do with, you know, these are all kinds of power and control, really, right? And so when we talk about at-risk populations, we have to understand that really that power and control stems from that vulnerability, a group of people who are more vulnerable to violence, right? And someone exerting their power over them. Whenever I also share statistics, I like to mention that these are just known numbers. So what does that mean? That means that these are just reported numbers. And so even though we see that 1 in 10 Americans age 60 and up have experienced some form of elder abuse, it could be happening even more than that. And it probably is, because if you see in the second bullet point, in almost 60% of elder abuse and neglect incidents, the perpetrator is a family member. That could be a huge barrier to reporting. You know, it's hard to report in general, but it's really hard to report a family member, right? So whenever I share statistics, please keep that in mind as well. That being said, what are some of the different types of elder abuse, right? So let's start off with physical abuse. This is the one that we really think about, I think, in our script, in our head, right? So physical abuse is, again, a form of force to cause unnecessary injury or pain on a person, right? So it's intentional, right? When we talk about things like abuse, it's got that intention behind it. That's really important. So I'm going to just go over some examples. So it can include pushing, it can include shoving, slapping, kicking, pinching, burning, shaking, and hitting. And as we go through this, it's not a complete list, but just kind of how we can start to understand what does it look like so we can prevent it, right? Another example of physical abuse specifically for caretakers and older adults is the inappropriate use of medications and physical restraints, which is really important. So that it can include like force feeding, physical punishment, those kinds of things. Those are also examples that we need to keep in mind as we have this specific kind of conversation about abuse. So physical abuse is one form of elder abuse, of course. But what about, other forms? So there's verbal and mental abuse. So this includes, when a caregiver, family member, or even a stranger behaves in a way to cause mental anguish to an elder. So again, that intention behind it. Maybe they're being manipulative with it as well, kind of put downs. And so this can include name calling, of course. This can include cursing, insults, humiliation tactics, right? This can also include the silent treatment. When I do my healthy relationships training, I bring up the silent treatment a lot. This isn't to say that, for example, sometimes when we are having a discussion with someone, we do need to step away to process, right? And be like, I'm so sorry, I just don't have the mental capacity at this moment to have this conversation. Can we have this tomorrow? So that is different than specific silent treatment as a manipulative, hurtful tactic, right? So I do like to bring that up when I talk about the silent treatment. So again, it's used as manipulation. It's used as a form of control. As we go through all of these different types of abuse, just think of it as this is someone using these tactics to control someone, right? And also yelling, intimidation, and threats, right? So that's really important. It's also important to bring up if an elderly person feels that they are being isolated or treated like a child through these threats or manipulative behavior, that can also be emotionally abusive, right? So they can also feel emotionally abused. So that's, again, a specific example within elder abuse, right? So going off of that, what's another form of elder abuse, right? So financial abuse. This is a really important one to bring up for older adults specifically. So if an elderly person is not aware of their own financial situation, again, they're more susceptible, they're more vulnerable to exploitation, right? So here are some examples. It could include the inappropriate use of an older person's funds. What if they're using it just for themselves, or they're overspending, right? So purchasing expensive items with an elder's money without his or her knowledge. absolutely just simply put, taking advantage, really. Scams for home repair services or health-related services. It can include denying the individual from accessing his or her own funds or home, right? So again, that control, that really important word there. It could include fraud, forgery, right? Pretending to be the other person. And then forced property transfers, right? So again, just taking advantage of a vulnerable population, right? Especially if this person is a caretaker. I mean, how heartbreaking is that? This is a person that you're supposed to trust, and they're just taking advantage of you. It's very heartbreaking, right? The other one that's important to bring up is sexual abuse. I think we have, whenever we talk about sexual violence in general, we have a script in our head that it happens to only women, one, and it only happens to younger women, right? And maybe it's someone on their evening jog, and again, I think that it's just the male perpetrator jumping out of the bushes and sexually assaulting, right? Again, that happens, but that's not the only way sexual abuse and sexual assault happens. And that's a myth that I want to break down here. So first off, it absolutely happens to older adults. It absolutely happens regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, if you're part of the LGBTQ plus community, gender identity, those kinds of things. So I like to break that down, that anyone could be a survivor or a victim of sexual assault. And on the other side, when I was talking about that, usually we think that it's a male perpetrator. It's important to know that anyone can also be a perpetrator or an abuser for sexual violence as well. So very important. But essentially, sexual abuse is unwanted physical sexual contact with someone else. So this can include inappropriate touching. It can include coerced nudity, right? So that can include like threats, badgering, whatever kind of coercion is going on. Of course, it can also include sexual assault or rape. It can also include forcing to watch porn, just kind of any kind of control over someone else, right? And it often happens behind closed doors and it's not reported. Remember, we talked about statistics, right? Sexual assault and sexual abuse it's the number one underreported crime, right? There's a lot of different reasons why. But it's really, really important that we understand that that this is still can happen, right? That this is happening. So it's important that later we'll look at the signs of sexual abuse so that we can help protect those. That being said, the next thing I want to talk about is caregiver neglect. So this abuse is specific for older adults, right? Or those that rely on caregivers. So maybe people with disabilities, those kind of things. So caregiver neglect is when caregivers intentionally fail to meet the social, emotional, and physical needs of an older person. So breaking it down, it's not just like the physical needs like eating, that kind of thing, but also that social and emotional, right? Forcing, making them isolated, especially now during COVID, right? That's neglectful, not being there like emotionally and just kind of, not catering to their emotional needs. That could be neglectful too. So just some examples here. Failure to provide food, water, and clothing is an example, of course, but also failure to provide assistance with everyday living and activities, helping with personal hygiene, failure to ensure medications are taken, very, very important, failure to pay bills on time, right? So we'll talk a little bit about financial control that elders should have, but if, for example, the caregiver's role is to just assist them in paying bills on time and those kinds of things, and that person just neglects it, that's a huge strain on that person's life, right? And then simply just abandonment in general, right? So really important to break down neglect as well. Going off of that, this is important as a caregiver or, for the people in our lives that are older adults. This can be really difficult for them. Sometimes older adults also neglect themselves, which is kind of an interesting conversation to bring up, but really important that this happens. So for example, they may refuse to go to the doctor when they clearly need to be seen, right? Maybe they have like a rash. Maybe they're having, you can clearly tell that they have a medical issue, but they're just choosing not to go to the doctor. Perhaps they just have no interest in eating, or they're specifically starving themselves. Maybe they're overdosing on drugs. You see that they're drinking a lot more, for example. So that's a way of doing self-neglect, kind of physically harming themselves. Someone close to that person, if this happens, may need to step in and take some necessary actions to ensure that that person is properly cared for, right? They may need to do some, stepping in to make sure that they're okay, because this also is very common forms of elder abuse. That being said, those are just the different types. Again, not a complete list, but the more that we understand and break down these types, the more we can protect them. So the next thing I want to do then is kind of see these signs of elder abuse. So what are the signs, so that if we see this, that we can step in and protect those in our lives and be a better, absolutely. So I do see that we do have some questions in the chat. And I see that someone if they're like a victim of domestic violence, for example, I'm going to be sharing kind of at the end, but also feel free to reach out to our 24/7 helpline that is available anytime, and we can connect you with the right resources. We have wonderful resources in the community that are domestic violence shelters, and we have great partners with them in the community that can definitely assist. So please reach out. But yes, if you have any questions for me, please put them in the comments. I have it open. That being said, let's get into the signs of elder abuse, right? So first off, a statement that should be made is that if you think someone you know may be a victim of elder abuse, pay close attention to some of the cues that may signal it. Whenever I talk about kind of signals in general, the main thing is kind of seeing changes in behavior, changes in appearance, those kinds of things. Seeing like severe shifts and changes in anything can be a moment to, as an active bystander, to step in and check in and be like, hey, I noticed this. I just want to make sure everything's okay. It doesn't mean that they are going through elder abuse, or it doesn't mean that they may be having suicidal ideation. It doesn't mean that they're going through sexual abuse, but it does help to check in and make sure that they're okay, because there could be something going on. So any kind of severe change is always a big warning sign. But let's break down each of those different types of elder abuse like we did before, but now we're going to look at the signs of each of those now, so that we can better protect those around us, right? So let's start with physical abuse, right? So these, again, not a complete list, but here are some signs. So obviously bruises, marks, pressure marks, broken bones, abrasions, and burns. So those are some signs. It could also include physical manifestations of like a sexual assault, for example. So maybe marks on their wrists or on their ankles, those kinds of things. It could include refusal to seek medical help for injuries, again, going back to that self-neglect, but that could also mean that there could be some coercion or threats going on too, right? Maybe they're afraid to seek that medical help because the abuser has threatened them after doing the physical violence, right? When we talk about abuse, there could be multiple victimizations too. So it could be physical abuse. You can see here, it could also pair with sexual abuse. It could also pair with emotional abuse and threats and those kinds of things. So that's important too. And then also nonchalant attitude about injuries when confronted. Maybe they're just like, it's fine. They're just trying to put it off, right? So that's another kind of warning sign, like a flag, right? We want to delve a little deeper and ask a little bit more questions if we're seeing that, right? So that's physical abuse. But now I want to talk more about like signs about verbal abuse. So maybe they just have an isolated personality. And I know that that's kind of difficult right now with COVID, because I think we're all kind of feeling isolated, but maybe just more so, maybe you're starting to see like, oh, we used to have a Zoom chat or a FaceTime every Thursday, and now they're just not really, answering the phone. They seem to be really by themselves. No one in our family has heard from them for a couple of weeks. Those kinds of signs, right? Odd changes in behavior or sudden withdrawal, right? Unresponsive and doesn't like to communicate with others. That's kind of going off of that. Unreasonably suspicious or fearful of everyday things. So that could include maybe they are now really concerned about or afraid to drive anywhere all of a sudden. Maybe they're just really suspicious about every kind of phone call that they're getting, those kinds of things, right? Maybe they have a lack of interest in social interaction in general. They just kind of want to be by themselves, or unusual depression. So obviously it depends, it's case by case basis. Everyone's, some people could have depression and depressive symptoms in the past in general, but maybe this is kind of, again, a big shift, a big kind of change that we're seeing. That's some signs of verbal abuse, right? Going off of that, what are some signs of financial abuse? Again, vulnerability for older adults with financial abuse is a thing, right? So perhaps you're noticing like unusual ATM activity, because it could be a sign that they're withdrawing funds for someone else, or someone else is pretending to be them and withdrawing those funds. Sudden change in financial situation. Maybe they're changing like financial institutions, or maybe they're just like, all of a sudden, looks like they're more impoverished, right? Those kinds of things. Maybe, again, large withdrawals from bank account. That's a big red flag. Why would they be withdrawing that much? Are they making a big purchase? What is the purchase for? What are they doing with the money, right? It could be a sign that someone is taking advantage and doing those large withdrawals on their behalf, right? Or the signature on check doesn't match the signature of the elder. I think that's a huge, obvious sign, right? That's a sign of forgery. Or then the elder's life circumstances doesn't match their financial assets. So for example, it could be all of a sudden, it looks like maybe their assets are kind of like moderate, but then the way that they are living their life is like, it appears that they have much more than they actually do, or vice versa. What if maybe it looks as though they have less than they actually do, because those financial assets are actually going to that caregiver who is taking advantage, or the abuser, right? So that's important too. So there's some, again, not complete list, but some signs as well. And then sexual abuse, right? So that can include vaginal infections. It could include bruises on breasts or buttocks. And that could include infections like on penile infections as well too, again, because sexual abuse can happen to anyone regardless of gender, vaginal or anal bleeding, and then torn or bloody undergarments, right? So just some signs that sexual abuse is going on, right? And then caregiver neglect. So what can that look like? So visible weight loss, right? And this can actually go in hand with, other signs of like maybe severe depression, right? That can be a sign of it too. But visible weight loss, so that could, means that perhaps that person isn't feeding them enough, right? They're neglecting them. Sunken eyes, maybe they are just restless. They're not getting the care that they need. Person with dementia is just left unsupervised in general. That's a sign. Lack of medical aids such as walkers, glasses, hearing aids, or medications, anything that help them get through the day that they normally have, they have no access to. Again, that's just used for control, right? No basic hygiene, or they're not getting enough food or water or clean clothing, right? And then bed sores, that means that they're not being properly taken care of, basically, which is just really disheartening to see, right? And then self-neglect. So this is kind of similar to the caregiver neglect. There'll be similar signs, but the difference is like that refusal to seek medical assistance when needed, right? That's a big sign. Again, visible weight loss. Maybe there's alcohol bottles laying around the house. Maybe they're using that as a coping strategy, right? Maybe they're abusing drugs and alcohol instead of taking care of themselves. Again, the sunken eyes too, right? Like noticeable, like complexion could be also kind of sickly looking. And then again, no basic hygiene, enough food, water, clean clothing, those kinds of things, similar to caregiver neglect. So again, those are just some signs of elder abuse, right? That we can be on the lookout as supporters and loved ones of older adults in our lives. But with that being said, what can we do to reduce this abuse? What can we do for risk reduction? And whenever I talk about risk reduction, I want to start off with saying that no matter what happens, it's not the elder's fault for the abuse. It's never the victim's fault for the abuse. These are just certain things that we can help to protect those around us that that are used just to help reduce the risk. So if a person does all of these things or none of these things, the abuse is never the victim's fault, right? So with that being said, let's dive right into kind of different ways that we can do prevention, because it's really important to know that there's actually many different measures that we can take to help curb the rates of elder abuse overall and also prevent elder assault from taking place too, right? So let's go through each of those then, right? So to start off, have your elders stay nearby and close to family if possible. So I also want to mention again, earlier we saw most of the time 60% of the reported incidences of elder abuse involved a family member. So keep that in mind when I do go through this. That being said, isolation really fosters depression and sadness and loneliness, right? And that, again, kind of just can spiral. And then that elder can find themselves being neglected by a caregiver or neglecting themselves, right? This can also lead to them feeling like a burden or feeling unwanted or that they don't even exist, those kinds of things. So by being close, you can offer assistance or they can come to you for help, right? So being able to live nearby them is really an amazing way we can help prevent elder abuse. That being said, during COVID times, I want to, not to date this, but I want to mention that one of the things you can do just to help with isolation is have a weekly Zoom call or maybe a daily call if depending on your relationship with this person in your life, just to check in and then just to foster that, connection. And then maybe you're not very close by, but maybe someone who is that can step in if there's an emergency, for example, right? So this is just really important, a great tactic to use to help prevent elder abuse, right? Moving on, keep in contact with them. So this is similar to that. So you can stay aware of their daily activities and habits, right? Kind of check in and be like, hey, what did you have for breakfast? Because that's one of the things that we're concerned about, that they're not eating enough, that kind of thing. And then just different habits to help and offer help, right? Again, having that really strong, great relationship will mean that when there are things that the elder needs help with, right, they can ask for assistance. This is, again, it's difficult sometimes because we do know that some older adults, again, refuse to seek medical attention. They kind of brush off what's happening. But if we foster that really great close relationship with them and the people in our lives, they'll be more likely to reach out if they do need help. And if you keep in contact, you'll also be more likely to see those abnormal changes that I was talking about, right? So keeping in close contact with them, especially right now, can make a world of a difference. Another thing is encourage elders to attend community events. I know this is a little difficult right now, but as people get older, they may naturally feel more isolated. That's just kind of a natural thing that can occur. So attending community events will help them keep their social life active and stay in touch with things that are important to them, right? And like their hobbies, those kinds of things. So in pre-COVID times, definitely like going out to different farmers markets or, you know, whatever interests that they have, you can help find a club for them to join and encourage them to do that. Maybe you can bring them along to one community event and then they meet people and those kinds of things. Now, during COVID times, I would definitely encourage to see if there's some kind of community events online. Maybe, for example, my own mom is very involved with the art group in town. They have a community art group and they have online events all the time. So I would definitely do some research, see what's going on locally for an older adult and help them, you know, set it up and everything so that they can still remain connected even during this time, right? Another thing that's really important, you know, going off of that with technology is that, you know, inform them of any solicitations that they should be aware of, especially if it's like happening, like maybe you got a letter in the mail, and then, you know, that's like, oh, this is, you know, phishing, or we'll talk a little bit more about that too. But maybe you are like, oh man, I really need to tell, you know, so-and-so in my life because to be on the lookout of this, because this is obviously a scam, right? So that's really important to just keep them in the, you know on that. But also what's really helpful is to talk to someone more knowledgeable, or maybe they are more tech savvy, that kind of thing. If they just have these conversations, they'll feel more empowered to be like, oh, I know, you know, what this is like a scam, right? So that'll really help them protect it. And if they're, again, if they're aware, they're less likely to get conned and have their identity stolen. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about how that can look and how that can happen. But again, this is another way to help prevent elder abuse and financial abuse specifically. And then going off of that, you know, don't let, you know, the older adult, to the best of your ability, to live with someone who may be abusive. And again, this can include family members, right? 60% of the time, it is a family member that's doing this elder abuse. So again, if someone has repeated history of violence or abuse, they'll be likely to be violent again. This is just how it works. So especially to someone who is vulnerable, right? That power and control. So older adults they're a vulnerable population. So in order to protect them, we have to do our best to make sure that they're not living with someone who may be abusive, right? And that includes family members. Another thing that's important is to make sure that they stay active. This is just really important. You know, exercise leads to happier, healthier, longer life, right? I think we all kind of know that. But also it decreases the chance of abuse, because staying active kind of just statistically speaking decreases that chance. But also we talked a lot about depression and isolation today, right? We talked a lot about emotional abuse. And this can really just help. Exercise can really just help empower someone and help them get out of the house and help them with that isolation, but also that depression too. During COVID, we can absolutely go out still in nature, on nature walks, provided we have like a mask and all that. So this can still happen. And also there's other ways too that older adults can stay active inside too. So you can help them set up like an at-home gym or something like that too. So just kind of building that endurance can really help with depression, but can also help with their physical ability too, to help protect them against elder abuse too, right? So that's really important. And then also, and this is really important to bring up too, that elders should be responsible and aware of their own finances. Of course, this does depend on the older adult that we're talking about. If they do have some kind of mental health disability that makes them unable to make decisions, that's different. However, you know, a family member can help manage the finances, right? Maybe they can help file the taxes, do the paperwork, do the heavy lifting in that sense. But ultimately, again, depending on the older adult, the older adult should control them, right? They should be making the decisions. They should know where their money is going, right? Because it is their financial assets. Because if they know where it is going, they're less likely to become victims of that financial abuse, right? So it's really important that, of course, a caregiver can help with the paperwork and the little stuff, but the older adult should, at the end of the day, be driving that bus. They should be knowing where the money is going and making those decisions so that they're not as vulnerable to things like financial abuse. Speaking of caregivers, we should be really selective of them, right? Some people put elders at risk for financial exploitation, right? We talk a lot about that. So some signs, again, they could, they could alter their wills. They could be adding names to financial accounts or land titles without their knowledge. They could use their money to buy expensive personal items. So knowing that, on top of like other things, right, of like obviously sexual abuse and physical abuse too, but knowing that how much power can go, like the power disparity with a caregiver and an older adult, and the risk that they can have, it's important that we're just really selective on who we choose, right? Because again, at the end of the day, this is a relationship of trust. So we need to make sure that who we're choosing, we can rely on them and give them that trust, right? So again, this bullet point says a family member or close friend is ideal. Absolutely. Provided that we understand too that a family member can also be an abuser. So still, for hiring a caregiver, we will be doing that thorough screening, of course, and observe how that caretaker, interacts with and treats that older person. I would recommend to still have that selective mentality of just like you're hiring someone for a job here as you would with a family member too. Just keep that in mind. And then monitor the elder's behavior and changes in mood or appearance, as these can give off signs of abuse, right? So just changes, really important, right? So also take advantage of support groups. So kind of ask yourself, like, what support groups are available? That would be great. Allow people with similar issues to connect, and abuse is less likely to go unnoticed, right? This goes, for survivors of trauma as well. Just kind of being connected helps them feel like they're not alone. We talked a lot about isolation today, right? And it also helps with confidence to speak up about problems or abuse. A lot of times, one of the issues here is that, again, people aren't reporting, people aren't sharing. Maybe there's a lot of different reasons why people don't report things like abuse. So having a social interaction can really build up their confidence too. Again, social distancing, right? So there are online support groups. So I definitely recommend kind of taking a look and seeing some of those online services near you, right? Or not near you because it's online. So we talked about, the risk reduction too. So now we're going to delve a little deeper into specifically elder theft, because we kind of were talking about financial abuse, but let's delve a little more deeper into elder theft and how we can reduce that specifically, that risk, right? So according to the Federal Trade Commission, again, more statistics for y'all here, 9 million Americans have their identity stolen yearly. That's incredible that happens. I think we talk a lot about like identity theft, but it's really surprising to still know that this happens yearly to 9 million Americans approximately. So we're going to talk about like the 3 most common types of identity theft, which is monetary, identity, and home theft. So we're going to go through each one together here. And once again, if you have any questions, please post them in the comments. I have them open and I'd be happy to answer them for you. So monetary theft, that's money, right? So what is that, right? And so what's important is that elders should be educated about common scams by professionals, right? So professionals being like, a lot of times people will show that like, oh, I'm a professional in this area or this area, and then they do a scam to take away their financial assets. So again, they take charge of their own finances wisely, right? So it's important that the older adult, again, is making those decisions. So again, have someone trustworthy. How can you protect against this, right? So have someone trustworthy to help manage your finances or their finances, but again, still monitor those funds and make sure no fraudulent activities are taking place. So by monitoring your funds, you're able to identify right away when something isn't looking right and can address that issue instantly, right? So if you're noticing like, hey, all of a sudden, I'm seeing this withdrawal of like $300 and I don't remember, like that looks a little suspicious, that kind of thing, right? So that's really important to help protect against monetary theft. And also, how can someone do identity theft, right? What are the different tactics that these abusers and people use to steal identity? So let's go through that first. So one of the things that people do in order to steal identity is actually stealing mail, so physical mail, right? Because why are they doing this? Because there's personal information on there, right? There's credit card and bank statements, tax information, checks, right? So these things have really important information that they can use as a weapon to steal someone's identity, right? Another tactic they use is called phishing, which is really just like putting their feelers out there in a mass way to see who like bites, right? So kind of like phishing. So spam email. So again, these emails appear legitimate. They look like they're coming maybe from Amazon or some other company or like a bank, but actually they are phishing, and they're posing as that person, right, or that entity, and they have and they're used to like make sure that you verify that information too, right? That being said, another tactic that people can use is cold calling. So this is essentially just phone calls and calling. Maybe they're posing as a donation to a charity. Maybe they're like, I'm a bank representative. A lot of times, some people pose as the IRS, but the IRS would never actually call you. That's really important, right? The IRS would actually send you a certified mail. They wouldn't actually contact you on the phone. Maybe they're pretending to be a family member that needs help. Maybe they're saying like, oh, this free prize or like low cost healthcare products and vitamins and cheap vacations, right? Just anything that appears enticing, or they're threatening like, oh, if you don't give me your social security number over the phone, your bank is just going to be frozen and you won't be able to, right? So that's another way that they do that, so that they can get this information and steal and pretend to be this person online, right? Another thing is sending mail. So just like we were talking about sending emails, it's like physical mail. So it could appear to be from a trusted source, like a bank, charity, or large company. And then they even can have official letterhead with logos and trademarks on it too. So that's another way that they can do that. And then also recording credit information. So maybe they, at grocery stores, department stores, restaurants, etc., if someone like uses a credit card there, they can maybe pull that information, right? So what can we do to prevent this, right? Obviously, we see that this is happening a lot in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different avenues. So it's kind of overwhelming when we first go through it, like, oh my God, this is a lot of different ways that someone can, do financial and identity theft. This is very scary, right? And it's not to make you all walk in fear. It's just the more we know about this, the more that we know what tactics that people use to take advantage of older adults and people in general, really, the better we can prevent it. So how can we do that? So when we do make copies of like insurance cards or those kinds of things, do your best to like block out the last 4 digits of the social security number, just so that it's not fully there. And then also with withhold personal information on the phone, maybe the full social security number, withhold that. Maybe there's a different way you can provide the social security number if need be. Maybe like the bank account number, right? You shouldn't have to give your full bank account number, right? Or your credit card information too. So those are different ways that you can withhold that information on the phone. What are other ways that we can prevent against identity theft, right? So store those important documents securely. We talked about how people will go through your mail or your trash, right? To get important information. So make sure that the important stuff, if you're throwing it out, shred it, right? But the other important documents, that you have them safe. So this again is just a suggestion. I understand that not everyone can do this, but maybe just have like a specific place in your house that you can hold this information. Some people do have home safes or safety deposit boxes too, and those hold like health insurance cards. Those can include, extra bank checks or your social security card or credit cards that you don't use often, right? Just like store those there, right? And then again, like I said, destroying those important documents like tax, bank statements, canceled checks, those kinds of things, shredding them. Sometimes people actually throw them out in separate batches too, like just to separate everything. So that's another option for y'all as well. And then just protect your computer and internet access too. So use antivirus or anti-spyware so people can't just like hack into your accounts that way. Create unique passwords that are different and difficult, especially your email. Because if you have a very easy email password that's easy to hack in, think of it this way. Whenever you go online and you make a new account, you use that email, right? And then you're like, oh, I forgot my password. Then it's like, oh, did you forget your password? I'll just email you directions to do that. So can you imagine if someone has your email password, they have access to your email, they can go now to all of your accounts that have that password and just reset your password, and now you're locked out of everything. So when I talk about creating unique passwords, I really mean it for your email specifically, because if someone is able to get into your email, that can cause serious damage. Going off of that, don't send personal or financial information through email too. And then protect your passwords for your home wireless network. And then consult a computer or software specialist, right? Check in with them, see what they recommend as far as, firewalls protecting you, right? And then we talked about earlier how like a sign of financial abuses or someone's like identity theft, that kind of thing is like, oh, kind of, I'm noticing like huge financial choices happening, right? Like all these withdrawals are happening and those kinds of things. So another way you can check to see if someone is, if your identity has been stolen, is to check your credit report, right? Because if they're making in your name these crazy or wild, I should say, purchases and not paying off debts and those kinds of things, you'll see it in your credit report. So if you have the ability to check your credit report, that's another way you can just check in to make sure that everything's kind of, shipshape and squared away. Now we're going to talk about home theft too, right? So not just identity theft, but also home theft. So many thieves actually target homes specifically that are occupied by older adults because, again, they know that they're more vulnerable. So they're sometimes even, committed by caretakers, which is just, again, really heartbreaking, who eventually become very familiar with like the house, the layout, where things are, and who they're caring for, right? For the senior that they're caring for. So what can we do to prevent those kinds of things for home theft specifically? So you can get a dog. You can also install a home security and alarm system. They have really amazing ones, especially now. Make sure your doorstep area is well lit too. Some people have like cameras in the front there too to see like who's coming and going. And if it's well lit, you can see it clearly on the camera, but also it's known that well-lit areas will just in general prevent crime, which is great. Keep your doors and windows locked, especially at night. Becoming friends with the neighbors too. So like if you're an older adult, becoming friends with your neighbors, but also if you're a caretaker or a loved one of an older adult, like you knowing the neighbors too, and to be like, hey, can you just check in? That's a great resource, really. And then be mindful of what goes into the dumpster. Of course, if you're throwing away really expensive items, that person can be like, oh, okay, that kind of thing. Don't accept help from a stranger, right? Going off of that, use a safe that's bolted down somewhere. If you can, again, just an option. Keep valuables away from plain sight from the streets, right? Don't like have your really expensive laptop in the window. Again, this is not to say that, anyone ever asked to be, robbed. Absolutely not. These are just risk reduction tactics. Whatever happens is never the victim's fault. So even if you do have your laptop in the window and you are robbed or a victim of being robbed, that kind of thing, it's important. Again, it still wasn't your fault. I just want to say that. Make sure your home doesn't look neglected. Again, just a tactic there, because that could be a sign that there's not someone like living there, and then they are like, oh, it's easy to go in. You can also ensure that your street number is visible from the streets. You can make sure that the garage door is closed all the way before going out too. And then you could set a timer for lights to go on and off, so it looks like your home is always occupied. So that's also helpful too. So with that being said, I'm just going to kind of wrap up here. I know we don't have too much more time, but just as a final, end here, I'm going to talk a little bit about services. But first, I'm going to talk about some barriers to reporting. These are kind of important because, why do people not disclose that they're being abused? Those kinds of things, right? Because if we understand that, then we can help understand where they're coming from and help be like, I understand why you may have these feelings of why you don't want to disclose. And if we understand those, we can better approach to share services with those adults that are being are victims of abuse, right? So what are some reasons why a person wouldn't disclose, right? First of all, the main one could be is they don't recognize that the situation is abusive. And this goes for the older adult being abused, but also maybe the person in their lives, the supporters too, right? And that's really why we have these conversations. Why I'm here today is so that we can see like, oh, that really is a form of abuse. Oh my God, right? So it's really important. That's a main reason why people don't report, because they actually don't even know that what's happening is abusive. People could be also afraid that it'll escalate. This is similar to domestic violence as well. That's a real barrier. They're afraid that like, if I do tell someone, I was threatened that it would get even worse. Maybe they worry about what will happen after they do disclose, right? Maybe they feel humiliated, especially if there was emotional abuse going on, verbal abuse, those constant put downs and those kinds of things. Maybe, they have the low self-esteem already, from the manipulation and those tactics, right? It makes sense that would be a barrier. Maybe they're blaming themselves, like, oh, it's because for example, abusers oftentimes say like, you made me angry and that's why, right? So maybe they're like, oh, it's because I'm such a burden and that's why they're lashing out at me, right? Which is not the case. It's never the victim's fault, but we can understand where they're coming from as far as their feelings of that, right? Maybe they fear a loss of connection. Maybe it's a family member doing it and they're just afraid to disclose. This is very common. Again, believes family honor or privacy is at stake, right? Maybe there's a lack of evidence of it. Maybe it's just all verbal and emotional and there's no like bruising and those kinds of things. Maybe they just don't know where to get help. That's a really big one too. Maybe they just don't know what to do. They don't know where to get help. And that's why it's really important that, we share that the VSC is definitely here for y'all. We have that office number, but again, that crisis helpline, 407-500-HEAL, HEAL 4325. Again, 24/7 for anyone who's going through any kind of crisis. Even if our services that I listed maybe might not like be exactly what someone's looking for, we have partners in the community that we can help refer to. So we would never turn anyone away. If you need help, please call our 24-hour helpline. That's what we're there for. And in addition to that, I'm also going to leave y'all with the Florida Adult Protective Services. This is for reporting abuse of seniors or adults with disabilities specifically. And there's that phone number too for y'all too. But with that, that's really the end of my training. Again, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that this was really helpful information. What's really important to know is that you're not alone. You know, elder abuse is there. It happens, but we can help reduce it. We can all, you know, come together. There's people there ready to help you through it and help protect older adults in our lives and ourselves. So thank you again. The VSC is here. You're not alone. And thank you again for joining us today.
Hi, thank you, Emily. Before we go, I'm going to put the banner up with the Victim Service Center website and number that has also been placed in the chat. If you have any questions, for Emily, you can place those in the chat. We'll stay on for another moment to allow you to get all of that information. Otherwise, that will conclude today's event. Thank you, Emily. I appreciate so much you presenting this sensitive topic. You did a wonderful job. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for watching. I hope everyone's staying healthy and safe out there. I don't see any questions in the chat. But again, after this closes out, you'll be able to rewatch if you wish, and the comments will have the Victim Services number and website there, so you can access that after the event as well. So thank you so much, Emily. And I'm going to conclude our event today, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to find out when we have new fun and informative videos for you. Orange County Library System is your place to learn, grow, connect.